Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalju. Welcome to our Avid online live session. And for those joining us for the first time, a special welcome. Please refer to the chat box for more information about Avid Learning, our platform, and our partners for this evening. Avid Online was launched on the 1st of April 2020 in a direct response to the pandemic. So now we're 16 months young and over 270 programs later, we can say that although 2020 and most of 2021 has challenged us in unprecedented ways, we continue to champion and bring to our audiences the best of the arts and culture, staying true to our mantra, as always, that learning never stops. This brings me to our evening session. Live History India and Avid Learning present Cultural Capitals, Chandigarh, the fourth episode of Cultural Capitals, Future Legacies of Indian Cities, an exciting series of discussions celebrating the historical and current legacy of culturally rich, diverse, and important cities across India. Allow me to introduce our evening speakers. Director, Le Corbusier Center, Associate Professor of Chandigarh College of Architecture, Deepika Gandhi. Visual artist, Manjot Kaur. Stage lighting designer and filmmaker, Gyan Singh. And they will be in conversation with author and co-founder and editor of Live History India, Menon. For more about each of our very impressive speakers, please refer to their bios that have been posted in the chat section. They should have been emailed to you also earlier. Through the Cultural Capital series, we aim to spotlight Indian cities, their cultural legacy and contributions that have shaped the nation's heritage and continue to have tremendous contemporary influences and impact. These speakers will look at Chandigarh through varied lenses, the city's growing art scene, its renowned architectural heritage and urban design, its emergence as a regional cultural hub. They will also examine it from the past, the present, and the future perspectives and chart its journey and evolution through the years, unearthing fascinating lesser-known nuggets, spotlighting influential personalities, and documenting pivotal moments along the way, which have shaped its distinct cultural and urban fabric. Please note the session will last 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. I will be taking the audience questions in the last 15 minutes, so do keep them posted, keep in the Q&A box throughout. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Minnie, for your opening remarks, and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asad, and a warm good evening to everybody who's joining us, including our panelists. I'm especially excited to talk about Chandigarh today because it's a city unlike any other city that we have been speaking about. It doesn't have the old storied and layered past of an Ahmedabad or a Jaipur or a Hyderabad, but it is a city that owns its own destiny because it is a city that was shaped in the modern era. It was planned, and that's something which is, of course, a feather in the cap because most of our cities are just growing and, totally unplanned. But nonetheless, Chandigarh has a certain character of its own, and it is also a product of a very exciting time. Mind you, a city does not need to be an old city to be recognized as a heritage city because you remember that Chandigarh is also the capital complex of Chandigarh is also a UNESCO recognized World Heritage Site. So it's very exciting to talk to the guests today because they also represent this different flavor of Chandigarh because we're talking about architecture, we're talking about modern art, and we're talking about theater. And these are not conversations we've had in this form in this series. Of course, we have covered some of this, but this really makes this conversation very unique. Deepika, I'm going to start off with you because talk about Chandigarh heritage and the name of Le Corbusier comes into the picture because he's really the person who is being credited with a lot of the design work in the city, in the capital complex, etc. But Chandigarh is so much more than that. He is just one of the architects of Chandigarh. So I'm going to start by asking you, what about the city has influenced you most, or what is a standout that you feel that the city really represents?
I think the one word in which I could represent Chandigarh would be orderliness. I belong to Delhi, and I never even realized that the visual clutter that you see in a place like Delhi, like the signboards and small shop, big house, small house, and all that visual clutter, it actually used to get to me. And I used to think that I don't like to travel in Delhi, but it turned out that it was not about traveling; it was about this whole the lack of harmony. So in Chandigarh, I think the one word would be orderliness and harmony. So you have what Corbusier wanted, that the harmony of man with nature. And for him, it was not about just designing a modern city. Like his fundamental principle was to have this man cosmos relationship, to sort of reinforce that through urban planning, which sounds like a very utopian kind of a dream, but in many places I think he was able to achieve that, and that is, I think, what the success of Chandigarh has been.
Right. But I remember you talking to me earlier, and you said that, one of the fascinating things about Chandigarh that you find, because you've actually come there as a student and then as a professional, is the spirit of the city. How
See,
it presents the remaking out of a very, very traumatic period. It was
yeah.
post partition, it was a new city, and it represents for you the Punjabi spirit of saying that, forget the
Exactly.
past, let's make a brilliant future. So do talk about that.
See, you really have to do your 2 minutes ode to Corbusier when you talk of Chandigarh. But after that, I immediately cut to the part wherein the Indian team comes in. Okay, starting from the vision of Jawharlal Nehru, try to visualize your prime minister of a country which has just been through a 200-year-old struggle for independence. Okay, you're considered to be a developing country, a third world nation, and all those things you could think of, a country of fakirs and snake charmers and this and that. And then you have the audacity of saying we will make a new city and it will be a modern city and it will be unfettered by the past. By unfettered, he did not mean that we'll forget the past, but just that it will be a modern city. And I think somewhere, like as I like to call it, it's a very Punjabi thing. Like of course he was Gandhi. We're not even going to religion over there. It's just about the spirit of like okay, hard times faces. Let's do something like which really lifts up everyone. Okay, so I think Chandigarh is not just about what Corbusier did. It is about what we let him do in Chandigarh. It is about this opportunity that we gave him to design one of the biggest urban planning experiments in a time and under conditions which I think even today, if you get an audit done or if you say, okay, let's make a new city with this kind of a budget, with this kind of equipment and technology, it would not be possible in any part of the world right now. So I think but Chandigarh, more than anything, is an ode to the Punjabi spirit, the Punjabi spirit of never say die. And when hardships face you, that's when you bring it on, when you actually give your best to it. And it's actually such an amazing, like if Dhwani could just share the slides that I had sent her, I would be able to clarify this point better. Dhwani, could you please share the slides? So see, this is what Chandigarh is. It is not just Corbusier, okay? It is also Nek Chand, who designs a fantasy world of acres and acres. Okay, it's all about art. Also, it's about architecture. It's about the Sukna Lake. It's about the lifestyle. It's about the Punjab University, which becomes a regional nerve center for the entire region. Okay, so as like we say that Chandigarh was not created for what India was. It was made for what India wanted to be. What was our aspiration at that time? And not many cities are made like that. Unfortunately, we just make cities for our personal glory or the present time, but few of us think of what will happen in the future. And as Nehru said, that let this be a town symbolic of freedom of India, unfettered by the traditions of the past, an expression of the nation's faith in the future. So this faith in the future sort of became like a paradigm for whatever we did, whether it was the industry, whether it was architecture, everything, the society, how it changed, the role of women, how it evolved. And if Dhwani, you could show the next slide then. I just have three slides. I'll just go through them. And so this is what I'm saying, that, ironically, Corbusier himself never called himself the creator of Chandigarh. He called the creators of Chandigarh. He always used a plural word. So he included people like MS Randhawa and PL Verma and, this huge team that you see in the bottom photograph over here, this huge team of people and architects who worked over here, who were trained under these architects who came from abroad. So this is actually the spirit I'm talking about, that how it impacted not just that one moment, but how it continues to impact architecture in Chandigarh and in India across time and space now. And Dhwani, if you could go to the last slide. And this is what then is happening. Like, for example, now this is a museum that I was able to set up. This was the house of Pierre Gendre, which was in a very bad condition. So now what we are doing is we are preserving our heritage. We are actually building on it more and more, we are actually realizing the value of it. And it's like full of details. So like there's a quote, God lies in details. And Chandigarh, I think, as you said, what is Chandigarh to me? It is like an open book of architecture and urban planning. Anyone who wants to know, even a layman, I'm not saying it's only for architects or for planners, even a layman can get inspired. That lack of money, like genre used to say, that lack of finances is not an excuse for compromising on aesthetics. And I think that is the symbol that we need in India, that just because we don't have technology, we don't have money, does not mean that our cities can't be beautiful, our environment cannot be good. So that is, I think, the biggest takeaway I get from Chandigarh.
Uh, and given that aesthetics is hardly a word we use to describe our cities anymore, I mean, I think Chandigarh is really something that we must celebrate, because God knows we need a little bit of beauty, a little bit of planning, and a lot of stability in our cities, because they've just been, completely destroyed. The entire fabric, the design space has been destroyed. Gandhi, let me get you in here. You're the only one among the panelists who was actually born and grown up in Chandigarh. So there is one thing about the vision of what a city represents, right? What it represents and how it reflects what India wants to be. I think that's a beautiful line. But what is it living there? I mean, did this concept of man, nature, balance, and design and aesthetics get ingrained in you when you were growing up? How did the city shape you?
Yes, I think as a child, I was really fascinated with the spaces in the city, and I remember when I was about 10 years old, I used to cycle everywhere in the city, and because the city was safe for children, a 10-year-old to cycle around, and B, there were cycle paths at that time. So it was going to so many places on my own, and experiencing these spaces, like for example, the Rock Garden by Nick Chalji. And the Rock Garden is an amazing space of the different designs that you see there are really inspiring. And then there was also, of course, the Capitol complex, which had beautiful buildings like the Tower of Shadows, which is a very unique building.
Right. Yandip,
Show the photograph.
sadly,
the High Court
is a little bad with you. So I am going to circle back to you in just a minute as we try and fix that. But Manjot, let me get you in here. You have been, one of the rising stars in the art world, and you're currently in residence as an artist in the Netherlands. Tell me, what did you make of the city as an artist coming in from Ludhiana? And what do you think is the part of the city that you imbibed?
Thanks, Minnie, for the question. As you said, I do come from Ludhiana, where I was born and I did my schooling. Ludhiana being a very industrial town and also a very urban town, which was, as Deepika also said, like where she felt Delhi being way too cluttered. I also had like a similar feeling with Ludhiana. And as a child, I used to come to Chandigarh to visit my relatives in the summer holidays, and I would feel such emotions of pleasure and the beauty, especially in the greenery and in the landscaping, which was done by MS Randhawa, who should be credited for the whole landscaping of the Chandigarh. That was something which kind of like hit me in my heart as a child. And I sort of knew that I wanted to grow up in Chandigarh. I want to live there. And that's kind of my city that I want to associate myself with. So it was in 2006 that I wanted to start my college after finishing my schools. And then I had this possibility to either go to Delhi College of Art, or Chandigarh College of Art, and select one of them. And Delhi being again super cluttered, super crowded, I thought like, yes, Chandigarh is my city. And the College of Art, which is the design of Corbusier, such a beautiful, marvelous building it is. And I thought like, that's like, for me, that's my place where I want to inhabit, where I want to learn. Dhwani, can you start the slideshow? Yeah, next. So this is kind of a detail which is taken near College of Art. In Chandigarh, we have like the museum, the Art College of Art, the Architecture Museum, Arts Museum is all kind of adjacent to each other. And this is a small detail of the greenery. And then in the far end, you see the wall of the auditorium in Sector 10. So this blend of modern architecture and that of landscaping, that of the sovereignty of the nature, is something that kind of impacted my thinking process as an artist, as my artistic process is mixed of abstraction and also that of realism, and also that of where I kind of like push with this idea of what is nature and how human beings are colonizing the nature, what is the sovereignty of the nature. And at the same time, I also think and contemplate that how abstraction can be political. So Corbusier's architecture, can we go to the next slide? So this is again a detailed shot, not like a very detailed shot, but a shot from Punjab Assembly in the Capitol Complex in Sector 1. So on the left-hand side, you see the door mural, which is made by Corbusier. And if you see in the far is like a little shape from where you can see a tree. So these abstract geometrical shapes, something kind of like still have stayed with me. And when I work, so this kind of abstraction and realism kind of come to my work again and again. And I never knew when I was studying, like this is what is impacted me. So something that stayed in my subconscious. Can we go to the next slide? I would like to show like few of my, like 2 or 3 of my works. So this is a series which I did last year. It's a work, it's called Plants Are the New Children, where I was reflecting upon the idea of how Indian cities, also particular in Chandigarh, how they're becoming overcrowded over the time. For example, Corbusier built Chandigarh, or I would say not only Corbusier, but the creators of the Chandigarh built Chandigarh for a population of 500,000 people. When I came to Chandigarh in 2006, the population was 896,000 people. And now in 2021, it is 1.16 million people. So where we are going, how do we kind of support, like how does a city kind of like take so many people inside it, which is another kind of like a thinking process which comes to me when I look upon this idea of urbanity, the idea of growing population and overcrowdedness and traffic and pollution. So all these things interconnected, like how I saw Chandigarh from 2006 until 2020, 2021, and how the graph is moving upon. So these were the kind of thoughts that I was thinking when I was creating this work, which is at the same time very abstract. And then I titled it as Plants Are the New Children. Can we move to the next slide? And in this, as Deepika said, like Corbusier's idea was to understand the relationship between man and nature, and at the same time, how a city can embody the idea of a human body where different sectors, for example, Sector 17 is the heart, Sector 1 is the head of the city, and then he had the lungs where he made a lot of gardens. So that idea of gardens, that idea of imbibing greenery and landscaping into the city, as I said, again, kind of floats back into my work, where here I show the Lajja Gauri goddess giving birth to an ecosystem rather than to a child. And can we move to the next slide? This was a project which I did at Yon Vinayak Academy, where I invited people to write on this idea of why do or don't we desire to multiply, to think about this idea of growth, to think about the idea of consumption, to think about this idea of traffic, of pollution, and how these things are interlinked. Can we move to the next slide? This was a project which I did in 2020. This is the wall at the back is again that of the Government Museum and Art Gallery in Sector 10. And I was exploring, also to mention, Government Museum and Art Gallery in Chandigarh has an amazing collection of miniature paintings. And I was very inspired from that also as a student. And currently my practice is also informed a lot by miniatures and different facets of miniature paintings. So here I was exploring the architecture that I see in the miniature paintings, where there's a lot of distortion in the perspective and why that distortion existed. And what kind of playfulness exists there, and then how I superimpose that kind of abstraction in the modern architecture constructed by Corbusier. So this is more like a process image of the work which I did in 2020. So I think me living in Chandigarh has a lot of impact on my work practice as an artist, and it's gonna stay.
Right, that's fascinating, Manjot. Gyandev has come back, I hope, with a better connection. So, Gyandev, do continue, because you were taking us back to your childhood when you were cycling around Chandigarh. And I'm thinking, how this series is really reflective of also what we are facing collectively, right, as urban dwellers in the city, in India, where, like Manjot said, the population explosion has been so stark over the last 20 years. Forget the last 55, but really, and that has changed the shape of the way our cities are and how we engage with it. And moreover, it's so important to have this conversation lest we forget where we came from, and also find answers of what we should be doing to kind of retain spaces. So tell us about how you have seen Chandigarh change and how you have kind of been shaped by your city, Gambit.
Yes, I mean, Chandigarh has changed a lot. And from my childhood, I remember these spaces to be empty spaces where I would go, whether it would be the Capitol Complex, as Manjot said, or the botanical gardens, the Japanese garden we have here, the Rock Garden, the Rose Garden, the Sukna Lake. And I remember cycling around all of these places and how these spaces, just the design of these spaces impacted my work. And it's important to talk about this because, spaces, we live in urban spaces and thinking that they are not actually affecting us, but they really affect us a lot in different ways, emotionally, professionally, whatever. So that was one. And then I think the other way was because I was born in a theater family. My parents were community theater practitioners, and therefore they would evolve scripts of plays, and it was a collective sort of a way of making performances, and they would go and perform in public spaces like the 17th Sector Plaza or the Sukna Lake, or even the Open Hand Monument. I remember when I was a child, they used to perform there. So these public spaces became these spaces where interactions would happen, where the people would engage with each other, and it was not only for performances; it was also for protests. I remember when there were protests against the violence during the Khalistan movement, or even now during the farmers' protests, you can see a lot of these protesters on the roundabouts that they're protesting there. Also for women's rights. So I think the idea of having these public spaces for the community to come together and interact with each other was great, and you don't find so many spaces in other cities. At least that's what my experience has been. And I think I would like to share some of my slides and also show sort of a correlation of how Chandigarh has impacted my work. If you can see these buildings, as a child, I remember I used to be so fascinated looking at these buildings. Of course, the Open Hand Monument, this Center Secretariat, the building in this round building which is in the university. It really they were fascinating spaces for a young boy to just go and spend time there. Next slide, please. here you can see on the left, you can see those that red and yellow walls. This is actually the Chandigarh High Court, the Punjab and Haryana High Court here, and you can see the building, the way it's designed. Also, the Tower of Shadows, which you can see, which is a fascinating space. I remember as a child, I thought it was an interesting space, and somehow unconsciously, of course, it has impacted the way I look at spaces, performance spaces on stage, with my designs, which is lighting, which is usually very geometric and creates spaces, contexts where performances can happen. So just give you an example of the third slide. Can we go on the third slide, please? Yeah. So these are 4 images of 4 different performances, and all of these have been actually created with lights. So just trying to create a geometrical context for a performance where you're really talking about intangible emotions and feelings and very nuanced ideas, but how can it be almost visually fortified through lighting? So yeah, that's one of them. And if you can see on the bottom right, okay, this is the next one. The bottom right, you can see the sort of a Mughal arch at the back, which is also a light imprint. Using this stage floor as a canvas for lighting, that has been something that I've been really working with, using the stage floor for the people to see with objects, shapes on the stage floor. Next slide, please. Now, one is the stage floor, and then also probably making shapes in the 3D space. And now you can see how lighting has been creating these dynamics in the space. And how does that affect the human figure? And this is essentially how I see Chandigarh as well. Spaces like the Capitol Complex. How does that affect the human figures there, which I see, or how does it affect my body as a human being, and then also as a performer? Next slide, please. Also about the dynamics of color. You remember that wall with the red and the yellow, and I remember as a child, and they are huge walls. And as a child, I would see this like monochrome sort of a building, with these 2 colorful walls in the middle, and it almost looked surreal. Almost looks like a Miro painting, or I don't know. I mean, it didn't look real, but they are functional buildings with everyday offices happening. So that blurred line between imagination and reality, functionality and decoration, that sort of a thing I also try to. So these are some of the images where I thought that there was an impact of the city's architecture on my work.
Fascinating, absolutely, Gandhi and Manjot. It's wonderful to see how a city inspires artists and the creative folk, because I think that kind of reflects the real, the connection between you and your city. But, let me come back to you, Deepika. When we talk about a city like Chandigarh, it is still a modern city, but we are always talking about monuments which have been built in the past, right? So I'm saying that my question is, while the past continues to inspire, what is it that is being done in the modern era, which is taking this connection or this essence of the city forward? Or is that a huge lacuna?
Before I come to your question, I'm very, very tempted to give one quote, because what Gyandev, you showed your amazing work of light. And Corbusier, of course, I think not many people know that he was more of an artist and a sculptor and then an architect. He was basically an artist, and he used to, for half a day, he would do his art and sculpture. And I think that is why artists can relate to his work so well.
Interesting.
Because, it doesn't belong to any genre of architecture sometimes. It's very hard to put into a straitjacket that this is modern architecture or brutalist architecture or what. And in fact, there's one quote of his which Gyandev may find very interesting. Architecture is the learned game correct, and magnificent of forms assembled in the light. To Corbusier, that is what architecture was all about. That you have a very precise, image of these are the forms, and this is the kind of light that's going to fall on them. So all his sketches will always have a sun showing somewhere and the shadows and everything. Now, see, and which is why, as I said, that in Chandigarh, he was not trying to stick to a genre. He was not trying to stick to, okay, this is going to be the international style or the modern style. Of course, we find it very convenient to put things into boxes. And I think that is why we don't really need much to continue this legacy. And the thing is that Corbusier himself was a path breaker. He himself would not have wanted that even 70 years after he's gone, we just stick to what he did. What was important is to understand the spirit with which Chandigarh was created.
Right. But my question is that spirit still there? I mean, are you
No.
seeing it in
Because I'll tell you what, as I said,
what I feel is that most of our cities are caught in a time warp. There is this lovely era that we all hang on to for nostalgia. And it's great to talk about, but my question is that how is that shaping, or that spirit of the way Chandigarh was built, shaping young architects, young city planners, the political decision makers, if at all?
unfortunately, it is not. I wish I could say it was. But, in a way, which is a very unfortunate thing because, there's another quotation that every trend becomes a victim of its own popularity. So after a certain point, it becomes very fashionable to criticize the thing which is like it's Corbusier bashing is actually quite the norm nowadays. Okay, or saying, oh, these government houses in Chandigarh, but people don't understand the background behind it. More importantly, people don't realize we haven't really gone very far from what we were at that time. India is still, I'm not saying we have not progressed, but the hardships or the realities that face us, the lack of technology, the lack of money, and population is increasing, we need to house people quickly and efficiently. Those questions are still the same as they were at that time. So, in fact, even though we are not doing that, we are blindly running towards the west. But I think a city like Chandigarh, in the sense, not just one, we should have had at least 10 more Chandigarhs. Take it as a blueprint, and not the same Chandigarh. Again, as I'm saying, it's very important to understand the essence of what Chandigarh was. What were they trying to do? How were they trying to do it? Learn your lessons, and then in today's time and age, with today's technology, you find the solution, but you maintain that spirit of experimentation. Like it was always called the Chandigarh experiment by the entire team, that it's an experiment and let's see what happens. So unfortunately, we have not learned from the experiment. We have not, and we have not shown enough grit to even question it. I mean, I'm not even saying that we should accept it. We have not been asking the right questions, that what should we take out and what should we leave, because we don't want to ask those uncomfortable questions. We're just clinging to everything that we see, although that's not what we need to do right now. We need to find the lessons and discard what is not relevant right now.
And I think as a nation, we've just gone down in respect to that. Because if you speak of Jawharlal Nehru and all the leaders, they were polymaths who understood and were excited about the building of India, right? And a lot of this was a product of that excitement, of that ability to be curious, about the ability to kind of push the envelope. And I think, in many respects, we've just regressed from there. Manjot, I want to come to you. Now, the city inspired you, and it was very well reflected in the art that you showed, the work that you have done. But does it continue to inspire young artists? Is the interaction and the spirit of the artistic, which Corbusier, of course, kind of exemplified through architecture, still living and vibrant in Chandigarh, according to you, among the youngsters?
I would like to bring here the role of institutions and the role of Government College of Art, Punjab Lalit Kala Academy, Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy, Government Museum and Art Gallery. I think to bring this vibe inside the youngsters is also the role of institutions to engage with the young people. And I've seen that happening. I remember in 2006, there was not so much. It was kind of a little bit of it. But in 2009, I remember it was Mr. Diwan Mana who became the chairperson of Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy. And there was a sudden shift. There was a sudden raise, a raise in the standards of how art should be, how they should engage with the youngsters. the kind of people that he brought to Chandigarh. He started organizing a lot of talks, a lot of lectures, organizing exhibitions, and then all I would like to mention all the important artist names. For example, Atul Dodia, for example, Subodh Gupta, Sudarshan Shetty, Mithu Sen, and many more. You name an artist, and that artist have been to Chandigarh not once but twice. In like he was there for more or less for like a decade, I would say, and that was the time when I was studying, and I think the role that this institution, Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy, was playing should also be played by Government College of Art. And I would like to criticize the college in relation to the kind of people that they should be inviting as a faculty, for example, or the workshops that they should be organizing, or as Deepika said, something that happened in the past in relation to architecture, which was modern at that point, but where have we gone from that time to now, in a way? And similarly, in the College of Art, they have a particular syllabus, and they cling upon to that, but they do not talk about the contemporary art questions, which is kind of lacking. And that is the vigor that youth need to bring upon. And that was what in from, let's say, from 2009 onwards until 2017 to, I'm not sure with the exact year, but until Mr. Devan Mana was the president of Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy, I was kind of like literally enriched. And a lot of my friends also were like, we used to visit, go to these talks, which used to happen like, at least they would happen like one talk or two talks every week, more or less. And he organized different festivals, and he also archived all of them in the form of videos and then in the form of catalogs, that any time now you want to look into the history of that institution and how that institution put Chandigarh on the national map. That was, I think, that is commendable, that is remarkable. And wherever I go, in any part of the India, everybody talks about Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy. Right now, he is the president of Punjab Lalit Kala Academy right now. But at the same point, as we've already mentioned, that in India is a developing country and there's shortage of funds. And also with the COVID, the funding for art sector has remarkably reduced. At the same point, I would also like to point out Government Museum and Art Gallery. There is a certain kind of professionalism that is needed in the city. We do not have enough arts administrators who deal with the young artists very professionally, though at the same time, there is a lot happening. Like, we have 2 art academies here.
Right. What about art galleries where you can show, exhibitions? And is there enough interest from the locals in Chandigarh for art as such?
I would like to bring the name of Professor B.N. Goswami here. He has been a very avid collector of art from the young artists, but at the same time, we do not have much private galleries, as the art scene in New Delhi is very vibrant with a lot of art galleries, collectors, curators living in there. I have seen a trend, like a lot of my juniors from my college and also a lot of seniors eventually who do good in art do not stay in the city. They end up moving out because there's not enough opportunities. There's not enough galleries to represent their work. So either they want to relocate to New Delhi, or they end up moving out of India, they go abroad and they settle there because there's more opportunity, there's more funding, there's more money, there's more appreciation in relation to that.
That's a very important point, Gyan. Let me bring you in here. See, a city, to remain vibrant, a city has to retain its best talent, right? And in many cases in India, one of the biggest problems, and that's one of the reasons I think this city and cultural cities that we are talking about is so important, is that the opportunities are limited. So if a youngster wants to have a great career, he has to be either in Mumbai or Delhi or maybe Bangalore now. But apart from that, there's a huge lacuna. Interestingly, cities like Jaipur and Ahmedabad and Hyderabad are finding their feet finding their personality. And that's what this series has brought out very evidently, because there is a new resurgence that is happening there. And resurgence that implies opportunity for youngsters to stay back and experiment and really innovate and be creative. Is that happening in Chandigarh?
I would say, as Manjot was saying, there are a lot of issues that we have to deal with, and there are spaces which can be institutions which can be really helpful for the youngsters and for the whole ecosystem. But there are issues we know about. There's a money problem, there's bureaucracy and all of that. But I just wanted to add one thing here, is that one also needs to see how my connection with Chandigarh is very personal. It has impacted my way of understanding the world and also expressing myself. Now, that sort of an enrichment might not be is very important to me. The city itself might not be a space where I show my art. In fact, a lot of those performances that you had seen were not in Chandigarh. They were, some of them were not in India also. A point that I'm trying to make is that a, a city as a space needs to be something that enriches you as a human being. That is one point. And then it creates a sort of a, and it affects you in so many different ways, and we don't even know. There's so many people who have probably spent some time in Chandigarh and now are in different places, but they are carrying the fragrance of what they fragrance of Chandigarh with them, be it they're in Bombay or in Delhi or Singapore or anywhere else. Having said that, I feel that the ecosystem can be stronger, and as Manjot said, the institutions play a great role, but also people, artists who do live here, to create a sort of a support system for the youngsters. And I had some support system here. Neelaman Singh Chaudhary is here. I was there for, I want to mention her name. There was Rani Balbir Kaur ji, even Diwan Manna. And Sangeet Natak Academy, as Manjot was saying about the Lalit Kala Academy, the Sangeet Natak Academy under G.S. Channi, who was my father, was also doing a lot of performances, inviting a lot of performances at the Tagore Theatre. So for performance artists, I feel these kind of changes have come.
Sure.
So it's kind of finding its own feet in the whole
Right.
ecosystem. Yeah.
Right, of course, Manjot mentioned B.N. Goswami. I mean, he's a legend, of course. The collection in Chandigarh of the miniatures is legendary, the Pahadi miniatures. And the work that he has done has been so spectacular. It's put Chandigarh on the world map, literally. But, Deepika, I want to ask you, you came from outside as a student to Chandigarh.
Yeah.
I'm presuming fell in love with Le Corbusier, so that's why you're working so closely on his work. And you can correct me. And then you continue to stay here. So my question is related to the last question I asked, which is really, how does the city, is Chandigarh retaining and bringing in people from across? Is it becoming cosmopolitan according to you?
It is definitely becoming cosmopolitan, but I think the people who stay back in Chandigarh, it's not because of, like, for example, when we decided, me and my husband, that we will settle down in Chandigarh, although neither of us belong to Chandigarh, it was a conscious decision, knowing that financially we will not do as well over here as we would do in Bombay or Delhi or someplace else. Like, I belong to Delhi, my entire family is in Delhi. It would have been very easy for me to pick up my practice over there. It's a conscious decision. Like, just yesterday, till today morning, I was in Madras, and I asked my son, like, what do you think about it? And he says, Chandigarh ne na aadat bigaad di hai कि और कुछ पसंद ही नहीं आता. We don't like any other city. So it's like, it depends on what you want in life. I know many people, many of my own students, my seniors, my juniors. It depends on what you want out of life. Like, for me, quality of life was very important. Having that ease of mind and having time on your hands. Like, to me, having time is more important than having materialistic achievements or whatever. So it's almost like to each his own. So if you want this kind of a lifestyle, you can have it over here. When you want to go for a run in the morning, you want to come back home for lunch, have lunch, and then be able to go back. Like, I would say that, like, if you say how it shaped me, it has made my life so much easier. It's like I think hardly a day passes by when I don't thank myself and my husband for deciding to stay over here, because life is actually very manageable over here. You can,
Sure.
actually do so much in a single day, which in Delhi or in Gurgaon or maybe in Bombay or Madras, I may not have been able to do like that. So, of course, opportunities are limited. We can't deny that. In fact, coming back to what Manjot was saying and even what Gandhi was saying, I personally have seen, because we started this with the current Lalit Kala Academy. We started this open hand studios in the Corbusier Center, because Corbusier was ultimately an artist. Okay, so I felt it was a very good combination that you have a museum of architecture, you have a building in which architects work, and then you have an open hand studio for budding artists over here. I am frankly appalled at the. I don't know how Manjot is saying that, but I don't think artists earn very well in Chandigarh. And it has to do a lot, again, unfortunately, with the same Punjabi culture which I was praising, because that finer nuances of art, those finer nuances of theatre, for example, I don't know whether Gyandev has felt that, but the director of Tagore Theatre, whoever it is, usually complains that even if it is a free play, people still want passes. They do not want to pay 1,000 rupees to go and see a play. Very few. And even if there is a ticket, then there'll be so many requests for a free pass or whatever. Chandigarh is still culturally evolving. So for artists of all genres, for singers, for artists like visual artists, for theatre people, it is still a very rough road, and they don't get their due. I mean, I see brilliant artists sometimes who hold exhibitions in the Punjab Kala Bhavan or in the art gallery, and it is appalling that sometimes they don't sell a single painting because it's not what the people want. I mean, the people still don't have a very evolved sense of art. So
It's
a
a vicious
woman,
cycle, really, isn't it? It's a vicious cycle because unless you are educated in art, you can't appreciate art,
exactly. So
and unless you
it
appreciate
goes
art,
round and round. Yeah,
you
yeah,
can't have a city. And yet you have this superimposition of this very artistic framework
yeah.
within which the city is. Manjot, I know one of the exciting things I felt, when I was talking to you was your experience as a teacher in government schools in fine arts. It's fascinating because art by its very nature has elitist connotations because to appreciate art and
Yeah.
spend on art, you need to have the money and the resources and the knowledge and the exposure. What is your own learning from the work that you've done in government schools?
It has been quite a rough road for me to be in a government school. I did that job because there are very few opportunities for an artist to survive in Chandigarh.
Yeah, yeah,
If you're lucky enough, you get a government job in a school. And and in relation to government schools, there are only handful of schools which are doing brilliant in comparison to private schools. The rest of the government schools do not have enough infrastructure. Forget an art room. If you have a good room for teachers to sit, like a teacher's room where like a lounge for teachers, for example, if you have that, that's amazing, that's beautiful. If you have enough bathrooms, enough toilets, of water to drink, that's great. If you're asking for an art room in a school, I'm talking about the infrastructure right now, so you are committing a crime. I'm saying it very openly. Now I come to the to the students. I was kind of like teaching in a school which was on the periphery of the Chandigarh. So I had students who came from very underprivileged families. So for me, I loved working with those kids. Few of them, they were like super talented, and they had this will to learn and power to learn. But at the same time, it is also important what kind of boss you have. Is your boss supportive in art? As Deepika already said, people do not buy art, they do not support art. Art is looked upon as something which is not required.
exactly.
All you need to do is to become an engineer. All you need to do is to attend your science class, your maths class, and teachers who teach home science, who teach music, or who teach, for example, dance, or who teach fine arts. They are not a valuable support system. They're not kind of like required. All I ended up doing was just taking adjustment periods And then apart from that, I have always been invited from abroad to do either residencies or exhibitions. And when I went to the administration of Chandigarh, that I do want a leave, which if I can have an unpaid leave, for example, because I want to, upgrade myself as an artist, but there was no support system from the administration as well. So that is another kind
Appalling.
of a problem which I faced.
It's appalling, and Deepika, I'll come back to you before I come to Gyan. Because I think what is appalling is this class divide when it comes to art appreciation, and that's also imposed because I think children or people naturally gravitate towards art, but there is absolutely no avenue for that connection to happen. And somewhere, and I'm not just talking about art. I'm talking about something like history, for instance. You talk about it's a national obsession, engineering and medicine and this and that, where you think that things like history and art and fine arts and theater don't matter. And we know that for any society to function, and look at India's own history. I mean, I'm always amazed at what we have come to from what we were in the space of the creative. But how do you reconcile this, Deepika? Because again, architecture, you can work in a little isolated island in gated communities with the elite, where you can create your spaces. But at the larger, populace has no connection. And this is universal to every city, big or small, How can we make this connection, you think?
As Manjot was saying, it has to start really early. We have to stop thinking of art as something you do in the summer vacations and then we forget. Okay. And not just about what you're talking about, class segregation, there's a gender segregation also. So even if a boy, for example, was good in arts, he would be very actively discouraged. It's a girly thing. Art is a girly thing. Girls make pretty things and beautiful things. And I've seen many boys whose mothers have actively put them into taekwondo to distract them from art. Oh my God, he was getting too much into art, so I put him into taekwondo. Like, oh wow, that's a good thing you did. See, ultimately, I think the problem is, as I said, this word called culture. On one hand, we are so proud of our culture. We keep talking about it, but we don't think what are we doing now. As you are saying, that we can't keep harping on what we did 70 years back, 80 years back. Okay, we had fulkari, we had this and that or whatever. What are we doing now to promote culture? We don't give enough space. And in the same breath, I would like to talk about sports also. Like, I'll tell you what happened. Like, in Olympics, you win 3 medals and the whole country is celebrating. Why? Because besides academics, hardcore academics, engineering, medicine or whatever, we have stopped paying attention to these other things which actually made our country so great. So on one hand, we celebrate and we are proud of the culture, but we don't want to take it further. We don't want to, okay, let someone else do it, but my child will do an MBA or a doctor course or an engineering course and go abroad and then work for USA or some other country. Right. I think as a whole society, our interest in culture is very superficial. It is not deep. We don't think of it as something like, okay, there are people who appreciate art, but then that will be, okay, I have green sofas, so I need a red painting. I mean, as an architect, I faced that.
That's terrible. I know it's again.
I'm sure Manjot must have been approached by someone saying, "मेरे ना drawing room में blue और green है, आप मेरे को blue और green painting बना के दे सकते हो क्या?" तो ऐसा होता है. We see people doing that.
ऐसा बिल्कुल होता है, Gyandeep. All the people on this panel are lucky. I count myself as very lucky because we have opted to do what we love doing, and we're doing a great job doing it, right? And it's super satisfying for all of us. How do you ensure that you create an ecosystem where others like you can also thrive? Because all of you have also, are successful enough not to be bothered by the fact that survival is a key, right? But how do you nurture an ecosystem that allows more Gyandevs, Manjot, Deepikas to come up and really, democratize the spaces that you are in?
First, I just want to say that I myself am struggling as an artist, and we all are. I know so many of my friends and are in the arts community. There is a constant struggle to keep your head afloat. Having said that, I feel that art has always been on the periphery.
Yeah.
I knew it when I was starting. I didn't choose MBA or anything else. I wanted to do this, and there are lots of reasons for it. And it's as Deepika was saying, it's what you want from your life, right? It's what you choose. What kind of life do you want? A quality of life or a way of expressing yourself or being who you really are, being in a certain way. I think that is a thing. Now, the other thing is that about the ecosystem, about kind of creating a sort of a support system for artists. I think it's very essential. It's very important, not only for not only financially or professionally, but also emotionally.
Hmm.
It can be very isolating, which is my experience as an artist to keep creating and then not being able to interact and uh, learn from what you're doing. So that is really important. And slowly and steadily in Chandigarh, I have seen these spaces coming up as compared to when I was in college and I did college theater. At that time, there was nobody doing street plays in Chandigarh, and college theater was not even heard of. So we have come out of that. There's DAV College where I had studied, where now you have a very active theater group, and a lot of theater people, actors have come out of it, and then they've taken that fragrance from that place and gone to Bombay, been in the film industry, or done their own thing in Delhi. So it needs to be there. It needs to come up faster. But there are some silver linings there. There's something which is happening in that.
That is so wonderful to hear because really, Asad, I can see you here because I am handing over to Asad now. But what amazes me is the fact that while we are zeroing and focusing on particular cities, the issues or the challenges are universal, and there is nothing
Yeah.
which is very different here in Mumbai or in Chandigarh. I think it also raises some very pertinent, large questions. As how are we as a nation really engaging with our cultural legacy, not only looking at our cultural legacy but also creating a future legacy going ahead. And I think these are very poignant questions, especially for all of us who are in this fraternity and who are struggling. And by the way, don't worry, even we are struggling because we have a startup on Indian history, 5,000 years of Indian history, actually 10,000 years, and yet we have to convince people that history is important. But thankfully we now reach 2 million people every month, and our universe is growing and growing and growing. So it's wonderful. But I share your concerns. And Asad, I'm so sorry I will not be able to be part of the next 20 minutes of the discussion, but I'm sure there'll be so many lovely ideas, and I will catch the recording of this for a change. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Minnie. And I echo your sentiments. I mean, even we are struggling. I mean, sometimes I'm accused of pursuing a hobby. I said the arts and culture is not a hobby. It's a viable career alternative. And I know Deepika mentioned about free tickets and free passes. I mean, at the Opera House, we get that all the time. So it's not a Chandigarh thing, it's a universal thing. And with so many of the things that even Manjot mentioned about lack of infrastructure in schools and colleges, that also happens in the US. I mean, we may not be very aware of it, but I have first-hand experience that this has happened to somebody I know really well, that there isn't that, and we think it's all, the grass is always green on the other side. But coming back to this, to a couple of questions I had, and then we've got many audience questions. you know um, the reason we launched this series was, we wanted to look at cities like Chandigarh, like Jaipur, like Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, that are doing some amazing work, and it's looking at the young people, not, and you all represent the young, the present. There's a lot of legacy in many cities. Gyan mentioned Dr. Neelam Mansingh. I mean, she's she's one of the pillars of the cultural world in Chandigarh. And in fact, I have to thank her because she's the one who introduced me to Gyan. But there is, y'all are the present, but there is also a future generation. There's a lot of interesting work happening. So what I'd like to do, and there are a lot of questions about this also come, so I'm going to summarize the questions into my question, is can you all share some of the initiatives that are happening in Chandigarh now that are kind of moving the envelope, pushing it a bit, pushing boundaries, besides what your experiences were. So can I start with Manjot and looking at in the visual arts space, if you could share some examples.
I would say right now there is little bit happening in the field of visual arts. For example, Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy is organizing different kinds of workshops for the young, be it painting, be it installation art. So they're also occupying spaces, open spaces in different architectural spaces, for example. But what I feel, what is lacking is a research, is a base. You do it for the sake of doing, but where does it go? What output does it bring? Where is it rooted? What are we trying to say through it? So that is something needs to happen, but it's commendable that these institutions are doing something even during the times of COVID. That is something amazing. So I think we need more of research. We need to kind of root ourselves in the specific topics that we want to address, that we want to bring about. And
right. Super. And Deepika, are there any best practices, any young initiatives that are happening that are kind of also redefining slowly? See, you obviously have a Corbusier hangover. There are questions about that also already in. And, as you rightly corrected us when we spoke earlier, that this is not just him, it's a team who created this. And, you can't go, it is iconic. You can't move away from that. But are there some best practices? Are there some, movements happening within the architecture platform or community or spaces that are changing the dialogue a little?
See, I can't speak for architecture at large because, in a way, I am a little disappointed with the kind of architecture that is coming up. Because no, I am very open about it. Many of my students are practicing it. My contemporaries are practicing that. We're just repeating what is happening in Singapore, Dubai. We're making these, Italian stone-clad houses, and which look very. In fact, I think the term is photogenic architecture. We're going more and more for photogenic architecture without much soul. I would like to tell you what I have been doing in the museums. Okay, so I started in 2015. I was given the charge of these architecture museums, and I realized when people don't want to come to the art museum, no one really wants to come to an architecture museum because there's even less of interest for them. They don't understand what it's like. If I start a museum on anthropology, it would be like that. Okay, so people don't really understand what's going to be all about. So I, being a teacher, I was teaching in the College of Architecture for a long time till then. I made this tagline: museums are the new classrooms. And that is what I took forward. And as Manjot was saying, there's a huge divide of government schools and private schools. So my endeavor, and I realized that, there's something called preaching to the converted. You hold an event about Gandhara art, and guess who all will come up? Who already know about Gandhara art? Okay, and we'll all praise Gandhara art and we'll go back home. Okay, so I realized that was not solving any purpose. So I also had initially these seminars or whatever. Then I realized, what is my target audience? What am I trying to do over here? I am trying to spread the message about heritage and architecture and the environment in general. Okay, so then I started targeting school children, government school teachers, and even the normal public. In India, the biggest problem I think is that all architectural discourse, art discourse, is held in English, like we're doing right now. Why do we do that? Why do we always talk in English? Why are the events always in English? Okay, so I again started this thing that, okay, we have to get in the government schools because they are the kids who are going to stay back in Chandigarh, unfortunately or fortunately. They are the ones who are going to become future citizens of Chandigarh. Sorry to say, but my own kids or other kids who have privileges will actually move out. They'll not stay over here. So who's going to be the custodian of Chandigarh? The common person, the person who reads Dainik Bhaskar and not Times of India or the Hindu. So I started focusing on Hindi speaking people, on government schools, started interacting more with the Hindi press, which was not considered very elite, by the way. Oh my God, you held an event and it was published in a Hindi daily. How does it matter? But I realized that that's what matters, because Dainik Bhaskar has more, I think, circulation than Times of India and Tribune put together, maybe. We don't realize that. So I think when we talk of culture, a very big problem I see is that our discourses on culture all across India are usually elitist, and we are supporting that. We have our own vocabulary, we speak in our own words, we speak to our own kind of people, and it's like to hear and to be heard just for that sometimes. So that was a very, and I think that I realized very early on. So I trained my tourist guides in Hindi. I got captions in Hindi. We have a website which is in Hindi now, like kind of thing. So I think this connection that we were talking about, it has to start very early and at a very deep rooted level, not at the level of the intellectual who's already evolved. It doesn't solve any purpose then.
True, true. I mean, I loved your saying that museums are the new classroom, and we had a wonderful session yesterday, last Thursday, on the future of museums and looking at digitization and its legacy.
Yeah.
Because that is the next format of it. And I also the fact that you said every building looks like you're in Singapore and all is not unique to Chandigarh. I mean, any place you
Yeah,
go in
everywhere, everywhere.
India. I mean, the sky. I mean, we had a talk once where we looked at the skyline of Bombay, and you could be anywhere, and how that
Exactly.
skyline has changed. It's become global, for lack of better words.
Yes.
But Gyandev, coming to you, I mean, from a theatre practitioner and someone who's been rooted, generation on, how do you see? Do you see some really important work coming out, even if it's researched and worked on and workshopped in Chandigarh and then taken out for the rest of the world to see a little more is also fine. But do you see an influx of some interesting talent that's being born or something different that's happening?
Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, performances, that sort of performance arts needs that of like an in-person live performances, so that has taken a hit. But having said that, I feel that the just the sheer number of people who are involved in performance arts and the number of amateur theater groups that have come up in the city, it has grown a lot. I have seen a huge growth, and maybe they are not they lack a lot of things like funding or even direction of where they want to go. But just the fact that that dialogue is on, it's continuing, that interaction is continuing, that spaces for expression is continuing. I think that is a big thing, I feel. Um, um, and of course, before this, there have been artists. Dr. Leela Mansingh Chaudhary, she has been creating all her art here, performances in Chandigarh and taking all over. There are lots of examples like these, who people who actually have been working here, and also then being mentors to younger students or practitioners. I have been. So I feel something like this is going to evolve organically. It would need its time to kind of soak in the juices and become this thing. And I feel something like this, even Delhi is struggling with. Struggling for for that involvement of the new blood of the young people to come in and taking this thing. But you cannot rush it. One cannot rush it. It kind of, it's cyclic, and it goes up for a while. It's really vibrant, and then the scene is really it's buzzing, and then there's a slump, and then that does not mean that art is not being thought about. Art is not being planned. Performances are not being planned. Performances are not being visualized, and books have to be read. Films have to be seen. Money also has to be made. All these things are happening, and art, performance arts does not happen in a vacuum. There are all sorts of influences that create that that style of expression. And I think it needs time. I would say it would need time. It's a young city. It would need time.
True. So, I mean, this is very interesting. I'm just going to jump into a few questions while I continue chatting with you all because I think there's very interesting questions coming through. Ankit Valia has asked, how can we define the culture of Chandigarh to the world? Or what is the culture of Chandigarh through an international perspective and how can we promote it globally? You know, to me, Chandigarh is on my bucket list. I'm dying to go there to eat the food, to see the beautiful architecture. And I have a dear friend who's from Chandigarh and I'm planning to go with him. But just, you know, then lockdown happened and all that fun stuff. But so how can you define in from your various areas of expertise, what is the culture of Chandigarh and how do you promote it nationally and internationally? So let's start with you, Deepika.
Okay, I have a very interesting take on this. I think culture has become quite like because all these museums come under tourism department, and I was thinking of in Chandigarh, I think it's like just we are sitting on a gold mine, like we are sitting on a place which could be the next tourist destination, and it's just not happening. So I started reading up, and it turns out that culture is the number one commodity that you have. And you have to create it. You have to create that hype around it. You have to find what is culture in my city, what is unique in my city. Basically, a culture of a city is anything which is unique. So, for example, we take it for granted that the Sukna Lake is there, the Rock Garden is there, like the Leisure Valley is there. It's not there everywhere. We don't have cycle tracks everywhere. We don't have open spaces everywhere. Okay. So culture basically becomes something which defines a place. You distill it and then you market it. And then that marketing gives you even more revenue to make it better. So if I showcase the best theatre groups in Tagore Theatre, that will give me enough revenue to make another Tagore Theatre. Or if I have good galleries promoting good artists, which can attract people from Bombay, Delhi, or whatever, it will give me more revenue to make more galleries. And then the cycle becomes like an avalanche kind of thing. Like that multiple effect comes up. So even the director of Alliance Francaise, the former one, once we were in a meeting, and I had just prepared a public art policy at that time, which has still not been implemented. He says, before the public art policy, what is your cultural policy? And it was like everyone got quiet. Like, what do you mean by a cultural policy? And he asked the same question, that what is Chandigarh? How do you want to package it? How do you want to promote it? And there are so many, you can have these parameters that, okay, it's a green city, it's this and that, or whatever. You can have this also, that also. So every city does have its own culture. We just need to define it. It's like if I ask Manjot, okay, Manjot, how do you define yourself in 10 words? She may not have done it till now, but if I ask her, she will. And then she'll be able to build on it. Okay, this is what I am and this is what I am not. So for example, Chandigarh may need to be celebrated for some things, but it doesn't have to become Dubai or Singapore just to become a tourist destination or just to become culturally vibrant. So you have to hold on to your uniqueness. I think that is what is very important.
What about you, Manjot, about the culture?
Yeah, I totally agree with Deepika, especially when she touches upon the word marketing. And it's quite a thing. For example, I've been traveling quite a lot in the last month, more or less. I'm currently in Europe, in the Netherlands, and been traveling to the nearby cities. And whenever I go to a city, as soon as I get out of the train station, I see a lot of maps. I see a lot of destination places, like go there, like 10 places that I see in a city, for example, and then there is a map and things like this. And I've also been in different cities within India, and none of the city is as beautiful as Chandigarh. Like for me also, whenever I am in India, I just want to be in Chandigarh. If I want to have my house and I want to live, like that's my city to be in, because it's super green. Like for me, when I'm strolling in the streets of Chandigarh, I feel like it's quite similar to kind of like the paradise cities that we look out to the west, for example. Like for me, living there is kind of at times more beautiful than living in the west, to live in the Chandigarh. And then we have amazing food. For example, we have Sector 15, all these lined up sweet shops. And these ready walas, which gives you momos, I do not get these tastes even if I go to an authentic Chinese restaurant, momos, for example. That is something that I love to eat, I love to be. And at the same time, another thing that I want to bring up is, for example, when Corbusier planned Sector 1, he did not thought of it as something that is exclusive only to few visitors. He expected that Sector 1 Capital Complex to be a place for people to hang out, to chill, for youngsters to come in, but whereas the policies that are being built now, even if you have to go there for a small walk, they would not let you enter. Even if you tell them, like, I am the resident of this city, you're just not allowed to go in there. You can only go there by those formal tours that the government organizes. So I kind of like find this very contradictory in relation to how initially that was thought, and what is being practiced right now. And also another thing in relation to where I touched upon the aspect of population on very initially. For example, I've been living in the Netherlands, and Netherlands is the country of bikers. People travel more on the bike as compared to they are on the cars. But whereas this cultural idea of I would like to touch upon this cultural notion of Punjabis, especially, where they love to throw away their pomp and show and how much money and cash do they have in their bags by the kind of clothes they wear, the kind of cars they travel in. So which at times I find very superficial. Why do you have to do that? Chandigarh is such a beautiful city, and that I think is one of the city in the whole of India which can support an infrastructure for bikers. So I think that these are the kind of initiatives that also government need to take. It's not gonna, as Gyan they've said, it's not gonna happen in a year or two. It's gonna take time. But at the same time, we need visionaries. We need people who can think for the future and how to take this city forward.
But what you're saying, and there's an interesting question from Harnish Pandya, and he says, how do you influence policymakers? Because they're important, the government is an important stakeholder to even allow access to some of these places. Any thoughts on that?
See, again, I would like to interject. Again, it comes down to realizing the value of what you are. Let's be brutally honest about it. Ultimately, the only way to preserve heritage is actually to market it. You look at, like, as Manjot was saying, even I travel here or there or whatever, and they have packaged everything very beautifully. It's only when the policymakers realize the potential that they have by this, by in the heritage that we have. Like, what does Chandigarh have? Ultimately, it's the heritage of modern architecture. What is it known for? The modern architecture, for the green spaces, for the wide roads. So ultimately, till policymakers don't, in Chandigarh, one problem that we do face is that there's not too much of a stake that people have. The people who make the decisions, they don't have too much of a permanent stake in the city, because people come, people go. Like, for example, I was questioned. I gave a presentation on the Sukna Lake, that this is going wrong, that is going wrong, or whatever. And I was questioned, why did you make that presentation? Why did you do that presentation? Because I have been going there for 30 years. I'm seeing how it is deteriorating. The visual quality is going down. You have signages and ugly dustbins, and you have all kind of creepers and planters coming up or whatever. But someone who's here only for 2 or 3 years will never realize that difference, how it is happening. And ultimately, I use this word, that killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Ultimately, that's what we are doing. That we are trying to, for example, the Sukna Lake was meant to be a place for tranquility, and we are thinking of putting party boats on that. So, like, we're just actually not understanding that's what I was saying, that no one is saying you have to stick to the past. You have to understand the essence of what was being done. Why is it of value? And do things which promote that. Then, if it was meant to be like a place of peace, organize yoga camps over there, organize, like, walks over there, organize free walks over there, have cultural events over there, have painters camps over there.
But coming back to Gyan there, because he's the true, technically he's the person who's actually grown up in Chandigarh and has been part of that and chose not to leave, like what we're saying, that a lot of the talent chooses to, unfortunately, leave the city even after being educated. So, from a cultural perspective, how what are the best practices, or what do you think is some of the steps that one could take to promote, and what is this culture of Chandigarh that one has to hold on to?
As a performative artist, I would say for me, the idea of having public spaces
Yeah.
for a dialogue, I think that from my perspective, I would say that's very important. And we have seen that uh, gradually that has been curtailed all over the country, all over the world. And maybe to open up these spaces, as Manjot was saying, open up the capital complex for the citizens to come there, and maybe allowing them to have maybe a performance. So performances in found spaces would create a better connection with the city, I feel. As a performative artist, I feel my community would really like to have that. As a child, I remember there were used to be performances or festivals which used to happen at the 17 sector plaza, but now they still do happen, but it's difficult to get permissions and all of that. So yeah, if the public spaces can become those, those places where people can come together and have a dialogue, maybe that is going to, so in a sense, culture of engagement, of active citizenship, and
Actually,
not yeah, and not only relying on the policymakers, because as Deepika said, it's true, they come for a while, and you can't expect them to have a connection like that.
Just another a very interesting question, and I hope Deepika, you know the answer to this. But so Dinesh Rana asked, like, Islamabad was a planned city built
yeah.
in the 60s to to replace Karachi as the capital,
Hmm.
and obviously it was built by a Greek architect, and there's a long question. But do you see any similarities between Chandigarh and Islamabad, or are there any best practices that were followed?
If you compare with Islamabad, Chandigarh has, I think, I mean, not just because we live in Chandigarh and we like it, it had a deeper philosophy. It actually, Chandigarh was meant to replace Lahore because this void left by Lahore, that is what we were trying to fill in. The initial plan was that we will make a city as vibrant and as, like to get the glory back kind of thing. But of course, then it took a totally different change and it became a modern city. Islamabad was not as lucky, I think, as Chandigarh was because we did have, inbuilt in the DNA of the city. We had some rules and regulations and edicts, and I don't understand sometimes, in Chandigarh, the Advertisement Control Bill was passed in 1952. The Tree Preservation Act was passed in 1952. At that time, they knew that there would be times when trees would be cut down for roads or for buildings or whatever. So I think the policymakers, which is why I keep saying it's not just Corbusier, very sound planning, very sound, because it's not enough to create something beautiful. You have to learn how to maintain it, how to preserve it. So we had that frames that those controls were put in place quite early on, and to a large extent we have been able to stick to them while also having a leeway for progress.
Because there's an interesting question here from Nandan Shastri, which is the same thing. He says, like in Ahmedabad, there is a trust to preserve heritage. Is there something like that in Chandigarh and its vicinity? I mean, you're talking about trees being cut down. We're sitting in Bombay. I have every tree on my street cut down to build the metro, and there's little or nothing one can do about it. So, are there some formal trusts or government
It's
bodies that
not
are
a trust.
very?
There is a heritage committee in Chandigarh, for example. Although it doesn't have any legal bearing, it's not as if that if they say no, we can't do this, so it will not be
Right.
done. But there is like, of course, the departments themselves are very sensitive till now, and of course, need-based changes are done. No one is saying that you should stick to the past. As I said, Corbusier himself would not want that we should just stick to what he did or what he said or what the planners said. But
Sure.
we do have a heritage committee in place, and all the decisions are taken up through the committee, and there's a lot of deliberation. And the people themselves are very active. Like, for example, we had this issue of a flyover, that we should make a flyover at the entry point from the main roads or not. And funny enough, the people rose up, and the people, I think it was the people part actually that got it stalled. Otherwise, it would have got executed, I think.
True. I mean, we're in this time of the pandemic, right? Whether we call it wave one, wave two, impending wave
Yeah.
three, whatever. And every conversation you have to, at the end of it, look at it like, what is this new normal going to be? What is life going to be after this? We are all hoping we're all going to go back to normal and better, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. But from a city perspective, from Chandigarh perspective, I mean, obviously cities survive on tourism, on arts and culture, because these are not just hobbies or anything. These are revenue
Exactly.
generating streams. I mean, museums can be very lucrative,
They are. Yeah, they are.
and so what are some of the things we can look forward to, and how do we overcome this lacuna of 1.5 years that we have all survived? I mean, I know when I was talking to Dr. Sonal Mansingh, she said that for the theatre world, like the people coming out of drama school for 1.5 years, they've had no work. So where they got their training, they've not performed. So, but moving forwards, let's put a positive, because I'm an eternal optimist. So let's put that positivity out there. From an architecture perspective, from an art perspective, from a theatre perspective, what do we have to look forward to ensure that? And this will be the wrap up kind of answers, to ensure that Chandigarh kind of retains and also owns and accelerates this cultural crown jewel, for what I could call it, of a city that we find it so exciting and endearing and inviting to look at as a city from India. So let's start with Manjot and.
Yeah, I think in relation to visual arts, the institutions that we have need professional people who are managing it, and they need full authority in managing. Not that they have to go to bureaucrats for sanctioning projects. Once they have the budget, and there should be dedicated budget to what they want to do, and then let them do it, because that's what professionals are for.
But just in this, I mean, we are again going back to institutions. But how about technology? I mean, you and I met because of technology and a project we did last year. But would things like technology, rather than put it to institutions, I mean, what can you are creative individuals like yourselves. I mean, you all are powerhouses by yourselves in whatever various genres you all work in and practice in. So, how is technology going to help that?
Technology is something, I think it's inevitable, and we are definitely connecting through technology. But at the same time, I would say art is just not only about technology. Art is about many other things, and artists, I would again come back to the same thing. Artists need funding. Artists need
Yeah.
support, and until and unless we don't have it, we all have technologies. Like every young person have a mobile phone, have a laptop. Until and unless we don't know what to do with that, until and unless we do not have the right direction. So we need a sense of direction, we need sense of freedom, especially in the cultural institutions. Only then I feel it is possible.
Sure. Yandev?
I think for me, as far as performance is concerned, more active participation, both socially, politically, being more present as artists for each other. And of course, as Manjot said, the money has been an issue. But for as far as theatre is concerned, I lived in Delhi as well, and people were struggling. I was struggling in Delhi with theatre, and there was funding, but there wasn't enough. Bombay is enough. So what I'm trying to say is that art by itself, independent thought and expression through performance arts, is going to be something where you have to work at getting funds for it. And yes, it can get much better. So, but other than that, to create active participation as citizens of Chandigarh, to come together, to take part, to come to public spaces and have dialogues and look for performances. I think that would be something which is the way forward, from my perspective.
Wonderful. And Deepika?
I, in fact, discovered it was like a blessing in disguise. I used to keep thinking, like how to spread the word about the museums and about Chandigarh and about the finer nuances, because even people, when they do come to the museum, they usually just breeze through it. They will come and they will have a look at something or the other. So when the lockdown started, and the first thing to shut down are the museums, and the last things to open up is the museums, and people joke about it, but aren't museums so safe? वहाँ तो कोई आता ही नहीं है, तो वहाँ पे कोरोना की क्या problem है? That was like adding insult to injury kind of a thing, but it's actually true. So I realized, what do I do? How do I get in? How do I keep museums relevant? So I started this thing of bringing architecture museums to you. So it started as a very amateurish kind of thing. Like I would make a PowerPoint kind of thing of one postcard kind of thing about one issue, like maybe the Capitol Complex building or something like that. And I started making these every 2-3 days. And I had some WhatsApp groups, and I made some new a Facebook page, an Instagram account. I didn't have those before for the museums, a Twitter account or whatever. And I started putting out these infotainment modules, every 2-3 days. Then I realized, okay, people are not just going to read it. Then I started adding jigsaw puzzles in that. Like there's a website where you take a picture and it becomes a jigsaw puzzle, and then you put a link and people can actually solve it. Or I started doing spot the differences. Like you take a tapestry by Corbusier and you have the original one and you have one with something omitted or whatever. So things like that. And I realized, why didn't I do this before? Because it's a good way of engaging with people, and it got a very good response.
Sure.
So I did continue doing that even after the museums opened up. Now I've discontinued. Even we started this whole series of like online lectures, a lecture series of the architecture museums. And because initially, for example, there's a architect sitting in Ahmedabad or maybe even in the USA or whatever. Previously, it never occurred to us that we could have a virtual panel discussion like we're having right now. And I realized very quickly that it is possible, and so we were able to have some really interesting discussions and presentations. So in a way, technology did save the day to a large extent, and I was able to keep people engaged with the architecture museums, at least in one way or the other. So
Thank
in a way, and I think it can continue now. I mean, it doesn't have to stop now, because that's something. It's like an add-on now. It's become an additional way of reaching out to people now.
No, I mean, thank you. Y'all are, from the way I look at it, y'all are the custodians of the arts and culture of Chandigarh, and it can, the limitations and the problems you all have mentioned, that's universal. I can see that applies to Bombay, it applies to Delhi, it applies to the rest of the world. But the beauty and the magic of a certain city that inspires your art, that inspires the way you do lighting, or the way you create your artwork, or the way you look at architecture, is kind of priceless in a way. You can't replicate that. And that's why, to me, Chandigarh is a very important city that I've always looked at as one of those cultural jewels. But on that note, thank you so much for such insightful comments, and thank you to Minnie and the Live History India team. I mean, normally this is all her job, so I know how her hard job, because I'm trying to look, there's so many questions and I feel so bad I've not got to them, but I think I've kind of got to the main kind of themes that they were having. Again, thank you to Dr. Neelam Mansingh, and to our audiences. I mean, thank you for being here in such big numbers. I mean, this would not make sense if you all weren't here day in and day out. And Avid, we stalk you quite often, and we do this on a more than a weekly basis. So we have many more interesting programs lined up. We have a children's film festival, which we're going to be presenting through the Royal Opera House. And we have a new series that we're launching in September. To find out more, just stalk us on social media or visit our website. But until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember that learning never stops. Thank you very much once again for joining, and to the wonderful panel for this wonderful discussion. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thank you.